There are objects in this world that seem to carry something with them, something heavy and old and wrong. They sit on shelves, behind glass cases, in the back rooms of museums, and they wait. Some of them are beautiful. Some of them look like nothing at all, but every single one of them has left a trail of suffering, sickness, and death behind it. Tonight, we're going to talk about some of the most infamous, haunted, and cursed objects ever documented. Objects that didn't just frighten their owners, but, according to the stories, actually killed them. In the early 1970s, in a small apartment in Hartford, Connecticut, a young nursing student named Donna received a birthday present from her mother. It was a Raggedy Ann doll, the kind with the red yarn hair and the stitched-on smile, the kind you'd find in any toy store or hobby shop. Donna was turning 28, and the doll was a sweet, nostalgic gesture from a mother who probably didn't think twice about it. Donna brought the doll home to the apartment she shared with her roommate, a fellow nursing student named Angie, and set it on her bed. And that, according to the story, is where everything began to go sideways. At first, the changes were subtle, the kind of thing you'd brush off as your imagination playing tricks. Donna would leave the doll sitting upright on the bed and come home to find it slumped over, or facing a different direction. Its legs, which had been uncrossed, would suddenly be folded the other way. At one point, Donna swore she left the doll in her bedroom and found it sitting in the living room. The movements were small and easy to dismiss, but they happened often enough that both Donna and Angie started to feel uneasy. Then the notes began appearing. Scraps of parchment paper with messages scrawled in what looked like a child's handwriting. Phrases like, "Help me," and "Help us." The paper itself was odd because neither Donna nor Angie kept parchment in the apartment. They had no idea where it was coming from. Donna and Angie tried to rationalize what was happening. They set up small markers and traps around the apartment to see if someone was breaking in. But nothing was ever disturbed. No windows were opened. No locks were tampered with. And yet the doll kept moving, and the notes kept coming. Eventually, the girls found something far more disturbing. One evening, they came home and discovered what appeared to be drops of blood on the back of the doll's hand and on its chest. Red, viscous drops that looked fresh. That was the breaking point. They reached out to a psychic medium for help. The medium held a seance in the apartment and told Donna and Angie that the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins was attached to the doll. According to the medium, Annabelle had died at the age of 7 on the very property where their apartment building now stood, and her spirit had latched onto the Raggedy Ann doll because she felt comforted by the two young women. She just wanted to be loved. Donna and Angie, being compassionate people, gave the spirit permission to inhabit the doll. That decision, according to the paranormal investigators who would later examine the case, was a catastrophic mistake. Things escalated rapidly. A friend of the roommates, a young man named Lou, had always been suspicious of the doll. He told the girls repeatedly that something about it felt deeply wrong. One night, Lou fell asleep on the couch in the apartment and woke suddenly from a nightmare. He couldn't move. He felt a crushing weight on his chest, and when he looked down, he saw the Raggedy Ann doll crawling up his legs toward his face. He tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. The paralysis lasted only seconds, but the terror of it stayed with him. On another occasion, Lou and Angie were sitting in the apartment when they heard a rustling sound from Donna's empty bedroom. Lou crept toward the door, pushed it open, and found the room dark and empty, except for the doll, which was lying on the floor in the corner. As he stepped closer, he felt a sudden, searing pain across his chest. he pulled his shirt up and found 7 distinct claw marks gouged into his skin, 4 horizontal and 3 vertical, as if something with claws had raked across his body. The wounds burned and then, strangely, healed within a day or two, vanishing almost as quickly as they appeared. It was at this point that Donna contacted an Episcopal priest named Father Hegan, who contacted his superior, Father Cook, who in turn reached out to a pair of investigators who had made it their life's work to study the paranormal. Their names were Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed was a self-taught demonologist and a former Navy veteran. Lorraine was a self-professed clairvoyant. Together, they had investigated hundreds of cases across the country, and when they arrived at Donna and Angie's apartment, they didn't mince words. The Warrens concluded that the doll was not inhabited by the ghost of a child. Instead, they believed a demonic entity had attached itself to the object and was using the story of Annabelle Higgins as a manipulation, a way to gain the trust of the 2 young women and eventually find a human host to possess. Father Cook performed an exorcism on the apartment, and at Donna's request, the Warrens took the doll with them when they left. Even transporting the doll proved dangerous. Ed Warren reportedly chose to drive only on back roads, avoiding highways, because he feared the entity's influence could cause an accident at high speed. Sure enough, the car's engine stalled multiple times, the power steering failed, and the brakes stuttered at critical moments. When they finally got the doll home, they placed it in a specially constructed glass case lined with protective sigils and warnings. A sign affixed to the front read, "Warning, positively do not open." It would remain there in the Warrens' Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut for decades. But the story of Annabelle was far from over. According to Ed Warren, the doll was responsible for at least 1 death. During a tour of the museum, a young man arrived on his motorcycle with his girlfriend. Ed was walking the group through the collection when the young man approached the glass case, mocking the doll and tapping on the glass, challenging it to do its worst. Ed asked him to leave the museum. The young man laughed it off and left with his girlfriend on his motorcycle. Less than 3 hours later, he was dead, killed instantly when his motorcycle veered into oncoming traffic and struck a tree. His girlfriend survived, but was hospitalized for over a year. Ed Warren was always careful to point out that he couldn't prove the doll caused the accident, but he believed with absolute certainty that it did. He also claimed that a detective who had taunted the doll during a visit to the museum was later stabbed and forced into early retirement. Then, in July of 2025, the story took another dark turn. A paranormal investigator named Dan Rivera had been touring the country with the Annabelle doll as part of a national exhibition organized by the New England Society for Psychic Research. Rivera had been tasked with transporting the doll to various locations so that audiences could see it in person. On July 13th, during a stop in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Rivera was found dead in his hotel room by coworkers. He was a husband, a father of 4, and an Army veteran. Authorities ruled the death natural and stated that nothing unusual or suspicious was observed at the scene. But the timing and the proximity to the doll sent a ripple of unease through the paranormal community and reignited the age-old debate about whether Annabelle truly carries something dark within her. The Annabelle doll's legacy continues to evolve even now. In August of 2025, it was confirmed that comedian Matt Rife had purchased the Warrens' entire home and occult museum in Monroe, Connecticut, including legal guardianship of the haunted collection for at least the next 5 years. The doll that started as a simple birthday present from a mother to her daughter had become the centerpiece of a media empire, inspiring 3 major Hollywood films and generating billions at the box office. But for those who take the story seriously, the doll remains what Ed Warren always said it was: the single most dangerous object in a room full of dangerous objects. Tony Spera, the Warrens' son-in-law and longtime caretaker of the collection, echoed that warning for years, cautioning visitors that the doll's influence was real and that disrespecting it came with consequences. Whether you believe in demonic forces or view the Warrens' claims with healthy skepticism, as many academics and science writers do, the trail of strange incidents that follows Annabelle is long enough to give even the most rational mind a moment of pause. Now, if you think the story of a Raggedy Ann doll sounds unsettling, let me take you to a place where another doll has been accumulating legends for well over a century. A place where the air is thick and warm, and the streets are lined with old wooden houses that creak in the salt breeze. Key West, Florida, at the southern tip of the United States, is a place with deep roots in the strange and the supernatural, and its most famous resident isn't a person at all. It's a doll named Robert. Robert the doll stands about 40 inches tall, roughly the size of a small child. He's stuffed with wood shavings, dressed in a white sailor suit, and his painted face has been worn down by time until his features look like those of something caught between a jester and a corpse. He was reportedly manufactured by the Steiff Company of Germany around 1904, the same company credited with inventing the teddy bear, and he was given as a gift to a young boy named Robert Eugene Otto, who everyone called Gene. Gene was the son of a prominent Key West family, and he grew up in a grand Victorian house at 534 Eaton Street, a home that still stands today, known as the Artist House. According to the most widely told version of the story, Gene received Robert from a Bahamian servant who worked for his family. Some accounts say the servant was skilled in the practice of voodoo and black magic, and that she cursed the doll as an act of revenge against the Otto family, who had mistreated her. Other versions claim Robert was simply a birthday gift from Gene's grandfather, purchased during a trip to Germany, with no dark origins at all. Whatever the truth of his creation, what happened after Gene received the doll is where things become truly unsettling. Gene became inseparable from Robert. He carried the doll everywhere, spoke to it constantly, and even insisted that the doll be given its own seat at the dinner table. Gene's parents would hear their son talking to the doll upstairs, and then they'd hear a second voice responding, a voice that didn't belong to their son. When something went wrong in the house, a broken vase, overturned furniture, strange noises in the night, Gene always had the same explanation. Robert did it. His parents dismissed it as childhood imagination, but visitors to the house told different stories. Neighbors claimed to see the doll moving from window to window on its own, peering out at the street below when the house was supposed to be empty. Children walking past the house would look up and see the doll's face in the turret window, and they'd run. Gene grew up, left Key West, studied art in New York and Paris, and married a woman named Annette Parker. The couple eventually returned to the family home on Eaton Street, and Gene, now a grown man and a respected artist, placed Robert in a special room in the turret of the house. Visitors and friends noted that Gene's demeanor would change when he was around the doll, becoming possessive and irritable. Annette reportedly despised the doll and was terrified of it, but Gene refused to part with it. Some accounts suggest that Annette's mental health deteriorated over the years she lived in the house with Robert, and that she eventually died in isolation in 1976, 2 years after Gene's death, in 1974. After the Ottos died, the house was sold to a woman named Myrtle Reuter. She kept Robert in the home for 20 years, and during that time, she reported that the doll moved on its own, that she heard footsteps in the attic, and that the doll had once locked her in a room. In 1994, Reuter donated Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West. She told the museum director that the doll was haunted. She died only a few months later. At the museum, staff and visitors have reported an astonishing range of phenomena. Cameras malfunction in Robert's presence. Electronic devices die without explanation. People who photograph the doll without first asking his permission. A tradition that has grown up around the legend. Report suffering streaks of terrible luck afterward, including car accidents, job losses, broken relationships, and illness. The museum receives letters daily from all over the world, hundreds of them, from people writing to apologize to Robert for having been disrespectful, begging him to lift whatever curse he placed on them. The walls around his display are covered with these letters, a testament to the sheer volume of people who believe this doll can reach across space and ruin lives. One letter reads, "Sorry I did not ask out loud to take your photo. Since then, my husband lost his diamond out of his ring. I tore my rotator cuff and my daughter's wedding was canceled. All happened before I returned home. Please stop the curse. I am truly sorry, and life is hard enough." Another visitor was reportedly struck by lightning shortly after leaving the museum without asking permission to photograph the doll. Whether Robert the doll is truly haunted, or whether the weight of a century of belief has created a self-fulfilling prophecy where people attribute their misfortunes to a single object, remains an open question. But the sheer consistency of the reports and the genuine terror in so many of those letters suggests that whatever Robert is, he is not easily explained away. David Sloan, the foremost authority on the doll and author of a book about Robert published in 2014, has stated that working on the project nearly made him abandon the effort entirely. He experienced a string of disturbing incidents during his research that he could not rationally explain. The museum itself, Fort East Martello, is an old Civil War-era fort perched beside the ocean in Key West, a building with its own haunted reputation that only amplifies the eeriness of standing in front of Robert's glass case. In 2008, Robert left Key West for the first time in over a century, traveling to a paranormal convention in Clearwater, Florida. In 2015, he was taken to Las Vegas for a television appearance. Each time, reports of strange events followed. Museum staff have grown accustomed to these stories. They no longer question them. They simply document them and add the letters to the ever-growing pile. Now, if the idea of cursed dolls and statues gives you chills, then the next object we're going to discuss operates on a completely different scale. It doesn't sit behind glass in a museum basement. It rests under spotlights at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., where more than 100 million people have gazed upon it. It is a deep blue diamond the size of a walnut, and its name has become synonymous with beauty, wealth, and devastating misfortune. It is the Hope Diamond. The story of the Hope Diamond begins in the 17th century, in the mines of Golconda in southeastern India, a region that for centuries was the world's primary source of diamonds. In 1666, a French gem merchant and traveler named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier acquired a massive rough blue diamond, weighing an estimated 112 carats. Some legends claim he purchased the stone from miners. Others insist he stole it from a Hindu statue, where it served as one of the god's eyes, and that the priests of the temple placed a curse on anyone who possessed the stolen gem. Tavernier brought the diamond back to France and sold it to King Louis XIV in 1668. The king had his court jeweler recut the stone into a 67-carat gem known as the French Blue, which became one of the most prized jewels in the French crown collection. As for Tavernier, legend has it that he died shortly afterward during a trip to Russia, his body torn apart by a pack of wild dogs. Now, most historians consider this story apocryphal, a dramatic embellishment added to the legend centuries later. But it set the tone for what was to come. King Louis XIV wore the diamond frequently, and during his reign, 5 of his legitimate children died in infancy. The king himself died in agony from gangrene in 1715. The French Blue passed to his successor, Louis XV, whose reign was marked by costly wars that drained the French treasury and eroded royal authority. He died a despised man. The diamond then became the property of Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette. Both wore the stone regularly. Both were executed by guillotine during the French Revolution. Marie Antoinette's closest friend, the Princess de Lamballe, reportedly wore the diamond on occasion as well. She was murdered by a mob during the Revolution, her body mutilated in the streets of Paris. In September 1792, during the chaos of the Revolution, the French crown jewels were stolen from the royal storehouse. The French Blue vanished. It didn't resurface for nearly 20 years, and when it did, it had been recut. The diamond appeared in London, now a 45-carat stone, and eventually came into the possession of a wealthy British banker named Henry Philip Hope, whose name the diamond has carried ever since. Hope cataloged the diamond in 1839 and died just months later. The stone remained in the Hope family for decades, passing through several hands, and every owner seemed to fall on hard times. The last Hope family member to possess it was the American actress Mae Yohe, who married Lord Francis Hope. She often wore the diamond in public and wrote extensively about its supposed curse. After 2 disastrous marriages and a career that crumbled, she died penniless in 1938. The diamond was then sold several times to various dealers and collectors. A Dutch jeweler named Wilhelm Fals was reportedly tasked with recutting the stone to disguise its identity after the theft. According to the legend, his son stole the diamond from him, murdered him, and then took his own life. A Greek merchant named Simon Maioncharides supposedly possessed the diamond for a time before driving his car over a cliff, killing himself, his wife, and his child. Sultan Abdul Hamid II of the Ottoman Empire reportedly purchased the diamond and lost his throne, his power, and members of his court. Each story added another layer to the growing legend of the curse, though historians have noted that many of these figures and events are poorly documented or entirely fictitious, invented by journalists and jewelers who understood that a cursed diamond was a far more valuable diamond than an ordinary one. In 1911, the stone was purchased by the famous Parisian jeweler Pierre Cartier, who was a master salesman and understood that the diamond's dark reputation only added to its allure. Cartier sold the Hope diamond to Evelyn Walsh McLean, a fabulously wealthy American socialite and newspaper heiress. McLean was enchanted by the stone and wore it everywhere, even reportedly clipping it to her dog's collar and letting the animal wander her estate with a $250 million diamond swinging from its neck. But the curse, if you believe in it, was merciless. McLean's firstborn son, Vincent, was struck by a car and killed at the age of 9. Her daughter, also named Evelyn, died of a drug overdose at 25. Her husband, Ned McLean, left her for another woman and eventually died in a psychiatric hospital. Evelyn herself was forced to sell her beloved newspaper, the Washington Post, and spent her final years drowning in debt. She died in 1947 at the age of 60. After McLean's death, her surviving children sold the diamond to the famous jeweler Harry Winston, who displayed it at exhibitions before donating it to the Smithsonian Institution in 1958. He sent the diamond through the United States Postal Service for just $2.44 in postage and $155 in insurance. The mailman who delivered it, a man named James Todd, was reportedly involved in 2 separate automobile accidents shortly after the delivery, shattering his leg in one and injuring himself in the other. His wife later died, his dog was killed, and his home was partially destroyed in a fire. Todd himself said he believed the curse had followed the diamond right to his doorstep. Today, the Hope Diamond sits in a rotating display case in the Smithsonian's Hall of Geology, Gems, and Minerals. It is valued at over $250 million. And while no one at the Smithsonian has publicly attributed any misfortune to the diamond since it arrived, the list of tragedy that preceded its donation remains long, detailed, and deeply uncomfortable to consider. Speaking of uncomfortable things to sit with, there was once an ordinary-looking oak chair that sat in a pub in the English countryside, and anyone who sat in it was, according to local legend, marked for death. It's known as the Busby Stoop Chair, or sometimes the Dead Man's Chair, and its story begins in 1702 in the small village of Sand Hutton in North Yorkshire. Thomas Busby was a petty criminal, a coin counterfeiter, a thief, and by all accounts, a mean and violent drunk. He was married to, or at least living with, the daughter of a man named Daniel Otzi, who was also involved in the criminal underworld. Busby and Otzi were partners in a counterfeiting operation, but their relationship soured, and one night, after a particularly vicious argument, Busby took a hammer and beat Otzi to death. Some versions of the story say the argument was about money, or about the criminal enterprise they ran together. Others say Busby flew into a rage because Otzi had sat in his favorite chair at the local inn. Whatever the trigger, the result was the same. Daniel Otzi was dead, and Thomas Busby was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. On the day of his execution in 1702, Busby was reportedly allowed one final request. He asked to have a last drink of ale at his favorite inn, sitting in his favorite chair. After finishing his drink, he stood and uttered a curse that would echo through the centuries. "May sudden death come to anyone who dare sit in my chair." Busby was then led to the crossroads near Sand Hutton, where he was hanged and his body placed in an iron gibbet, left to rot in the open air as a warning to others. The gibbet stood at the crossroads for years, and the inn nearby eventually took the name the Busby Stoop Inn, stoop being a local word for the post from which the gibbet hung. And for generations, the chair remained in the pub. It sat in the corner, unremarkable to look at, just an old oak chair with turned spindles. But the stories accumulated. One of the first documented incidents came in 1894, when a chimney sweep reportedly sat in the chair after a long day's work, had a few drinks, and left the pub. He never made it home. His body was found the next morning. Some accounts say he was hanging near the site of Busby's gibbet. Others say he was murdered by a robber. Whatever the truth, locals whispered that the chair had claimed its first victim. During the Second World War, The Busby Stoop Inn became a favorite gathering place for Canadian airmen stationed at the nearby RAF base at Skipton-on-Swale. The young men, full of bravado and defiance, treated the cursed chair as a test of courage. They dared each other to sit in it, laughing off the old legend as superstition. But according to local accounts, the airmen who sat in the chair had a disturbing habit of never returning from their bombing missions over Europe. Pub regulars and innkeepers noticed the pattern, and over time, the chair's reputation only darkened. In the decades that followed the war, more deaths were attributed to the chair. A roofer who sat in it reportedly died the next day when the roof he was working on collapsed beneath him. A delivery man sat in the chair while making a drop in the pub's basement, and within the hour, he was dead, killed when his truck crashed on the road. A cleaning woman mopping the floor one day accidentally stumbled backward and sat in the chair. She was later diagnosed with a brain tumor and died shortly after. 2 Royal Air Force pilots reportedly sat in it on a dare and were both killed in a car crash the same day. There were stories of hitchhikers and passing motorists who stopped at the pub for a drink, sat down in the wrong chair, and met their end within days. The stories piled up, and while some of them are impossible to verify and may have grown in the telling, the sheer number of reported incidents kept the legend alive and terrifying. What made the Busby Stoop Chair so effective as a source of fear was its ordinariness. It didn't glow or move or whisper. It just sat there in the corner of a country pub, looking like any other piece of furniture, waiting for the next person careless or brave enough to take a seat. By 1978, the landlord of the Busby Stoop Inn had had enough. He didn't want another death on his conscience, and he certainly didn't want any more liability. He contacted the Thirsk Museum and asked them to take the chair. The museum agreed, and when they received it, they made an extraordinary decision. Rather than displaying the chair on the ground where someone might accidentally or deliberately sit in it, they hung it from the ceiling, 5 feet off the floor, completely out of reach. It has remained there ever since, and the museum has never broken its promise that no one would ever sit in the chair again, not visitors, not staff, not even maintenance workers. A furniture historian who examined the chair later determined that its machine-turned spindles dated it to around 1840, well after Busby's 1702 execution, which raises the possibility that the original cursed chair was replaced at some point, and the legend simply transferred to the new one. But that detail has done little to diminish the power of the story. From a chair in a Yorkshire pub to a painting on a living room wall, the next object in our collection of cursed things traveled not through centuries of aristocratic hands, but through the mass production lines of mid-20th century Europe. In the 1950s and 60s, an Italian painter working under the name Giovanni Bragolin, whose real name was Bruno Amadio, created a series of mass-produced prints depicting young children with large, sorrowful eyes and tears streaming down their cheeks. These paintings, known collectively as The Crying Boy, became hugely popular in Britain. They were cheap, sentimental, and hung in hundreds of thousands of homes across the country. They were the kind of art that people bought at department stores and hung over the mantelpiece without giving it a second thought. But in 1985, that all changed. On September 4th of that year, a British tabloid called The Sun published a front-page article with the headline, "Blazing Curse of the Crying Boy." The story described the experience of Ron and May Hall, a couple from Rotherham in South Yorkshire, whose home had been destroyed by a fire caused by an overheated chip pan. The fire gutted the ground floor, reducing furniture, drapes, and personal belongings to ash. But one object survived completely intact, not even singed. It was a print of the crying boy, still hanging on the blackened wall, staring out from the wreckage with those enormous weeping eyes. That alone might have been a curiosity, a one-off story to fill a few column inches. But then Ron Hall's brother, a firefighter named Peter, told the newspaper something chilling. He said that this was not an isolated incident. In fact, he claimed that undamaged copies of the Crying Boy painting had been found in the ruins of house fires across the region, dozens of them, all surviving flames that destroyed everything else around them. He said he had personally logged more than 50 fires where the painting remained untouched. He added that he would never dream of allowing one of these prints into his own home. The response from the public was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, hundreds of readers called the Sun, all claiming to have experienced fires, injuries, or misfortune since hanging the crying boy in their homes. A woman from Surrey said her house was gutted just 6 months after purchasing the print. A family from Nottingham blamed the painting for a blaze that left them homeless. Another family's father destroyed his copy after returning from the hospital with his wife and 3 children, only to find the painting hanging undamaged on the charred wall. A pizza restaurant in Norfolk burned to the ground, but the crying boy painting inside was unscathed. Reports even came in of people who tried to burn their copies and failed, claiming the print simply would not catch fire. The panic spread across Britain like, well, wildfire. The Sun ran follow-up stories for weeks, each one adding new accounts of disaster. Theories about the origin of the curse proliferated. One story claimed that the boy depicted in the painting was a Spanish orphan named Don Bonillo, whose parents had died in a fire. It was said that wherever the boy went, fires followed, earning him the nickname Diablo. The boy was supposedly adopted by an artist whose studio then burned down, and Don Bonillo himself was killed years later in a car crash that erupted in flames on the outskirts of Barcelona. Police reportedly found a partial driver's license in the glove compartment that confirmed the victim's identity. Whether any of this is true has never been verified. The name Don Bonillo doesn't appear in any historical record before the year 2000, and the story has all the hallmarks of an urban legend built on top of an existing one. The real artist, Bruno Amadio, who worked under the name Bragolin, painted hundreds of these crying children portraits, using street urchins and orphans as his models. He lived and worked in Italy and Spain and died in 1981, years before the curse stories began to circulate. The reactions of ordinary British families were remarkable in their intensity. Some people reported that when they tried to throw the painting away, it would reappear in their home. Others said they experienced a run of terrible luck after attempting to destroy it. Sandra Caskey of Kilburn told reporters that she, her sister-in-law, and a friend had all suffered devastating fires since they acquired their copies. Brian Parks, whose wife and 3 children were treated for smoke inhalation, said he had destroyed his copy after returning from the hospital to find it hanging undamaged on the blackened wall of his living room. A firefighter named Alan Wilkinson personally logged more than 50 fires where the crying boy painting survived, and while he remained skeptical of any supernatural explanation, he admitted he had no logical explanation for why the prints kept turning up unscathed. His wife had her own theory. She told reporters, "I always say it's the tears that put the fire out." Eventually, on Halloween 1985, the Sun organized a mass bonfire near the River Thames, burning thousands of crying boy prints sent in by terrified readers. A fire officer presided over the event, and the newspaper declared the curse broken. The spectacle drew crowds and cameras and gave the public a sense of closure, even if it was manufactured. But the legend lived on, spreading to other countries and adapting to new mediums. Variations emerged, including one claim that placing a crying girl painting beside the crying boy print would neutralize the curse, while another version insisted that doing so would make the damage worse. By the 1990s, the story had migrated to the internet, where it took on new life and merged with other tales of cursed art, including the infamous Hands Resist Him painting, which had its own viral moment on eBay in the year 2000. A rational explanation for the crying boy phenomenon was later offered by the BBC. The prints were treated with a fire-retardant varnish, which is why they survived flames that destroyed everything else. The string holding the painting to the wall would burn first, causing the painting to fall face down on the floor, where it would be shielded from the fire above. It was an elegant, scientific explanation. But for the families who lost their homes, their possessions, and in some cases their health, the explanation never quite erased the feeling that something else was at work. Now, from a mass-produced print to an ancient artifact whose body count stretches back thousands of years, carved from pure limestone and dating to approximately 3500 BC, the Women from Lemb statue was unearthed in the village of Lemb, on the island of Cyprus in 1878. It is a small, unassuming figure, possibly a representation of a fertility goddess from the Chalcolithic period, the Copper Age. Its real purpose has been lost to history, but the nickname it has earned over the centuries tells you everything you need to know about its reputation. They call it the Goddess of Death. The statue's first known owner after its discovery was a man named Lord Elfont. Within 6 years of acquiring the statue, all 7 members of his immediate family had died. The causes of death were described as mysterious, and no satisfactory explanation was ever given. The statue then passed to a second owner, a man named Ivor Minucci. He and his entire family died within 4 years of taking possession of the artifact. The third owner, Lord Thompson Noel, experienced the same grim pattern. His family was dead within 4 years. By the time the statue reached its fourth owner, Sir Alan Biverbrook, one might have expected someone to heed the warnings. But Biverbrook purchased the statue regardless. Within a short time, his wife and 2 of their daughters were dead. Biverbrook himself followed soon after. Only 2 of his sons survived, and they were terrified enough by the sudden and inexplicable loss of 4 family members that they did what should have been done decades earlier. They donated the Goddess of Death to the Royal Scottish Museum in Edinburgh. You would think that placing the statue behind glass in a museum would end the trail of death, but according to the stories, even the museum wasn't safe. The curator of the section where the statue was first displayed reportedly fell ill and died shortly after handling the artifact. Some accounts say he died within a year of receiving the piece, while others claim it was a matter of weeks. Since that incident, no one at the museum has touched the statue with bare hands. It remains sealed in its glass case to this day, a 5,000-year-old relic that seems to carry something within it that defies explanation. The Goddess of Death is particularly chilling because of the completeness of her destruction. Other cursed objects on this list are associated with individual deaths, or with a scattershot pattern of misfortune. The Women from Lemb statue is different. It doesn't single out individuals. It annihilates entire bloodlines, wiping out family after family with a thoroughness that feels almost deliberate, as if the object itself has a purpose and a patience that no human being could match. Skeptics rightly point out that many of the details of this story are unverifiable, that the names of the owners are not well documented in historical records, and that the entire legend may be an accumulation of coincidence and embellishment. But the pattern, 4 families wiped out, one after another, each within a handful of years of possessing the same small limestone figure, is hard to simply wave away. And the goddess of death is not the only artifact whose curse seems tied to the act of removal from sacred ground. In the drawer of a British museum, there once lay a deep purple gemstone that had been locked away in 7 nested boxes, surrounded by protective charms, with a handwritten warning that read, "This stone is trebly accursed and is stained with the blood and the dishonor of everyone who has ever owned it." The stone is called the Delhi Purple Sapphire, though in truth it is not a sapphire at all, but an amethyst, and its story is one of the most detailed and personally documented tales of a cursed object in history. According to the account left by its most famous owner, a British polymath named Edward Heron Allen, the gemstone was looted from a sacred Hindu temple dedicated to the god Indra in the city of Kanpur during the Indian Rebellion of 1857. A Bengal cavalryman named Colonel W. Ferris stole the stone and brought it home to England. Almost immediately, Ferris's life began to unravel. He suffered a devastating series of financial setbacks that brought his family to the brink of ruin. His health declined. When he lent the stone to a friend, the friend took his own life. The curse, it seemed, was not limited to one man. Heron Allen acquired the stone in 1890, and though he was a rational, educated man, a friend of Oscar Wilde's, and an expert in subjects ranging from violin making to paleontology, he was quickly overwhelmed by the misfortune that followed. He later wrote extensively about his experiences, and his account remains one of the most detailed, first-hand testimonies of living with a supposedly cursed object ever committed to paper. He claimed to see the ghostly apparition of a Hindu yogi hovering near the gem, a spectral figure that appeared in his peripheral vision and vanished when he turned to look directly at it. Whether this was a genuine psychic experience or the product of an increasingly anxious mind is impossible to say, but it clearly shook him. He lent the stone to 2 friends. One was beset by a cascade of unlucky events and returned the stone immediately. The other was a professional singer who, after wearing the gemstone, lost her voice permanently and never performed again. The pattern was unmistakable to Heron Allen. Anyone who touched the stone, anyone who wore it, anyone who so much as held it in their palm was marked for suffering. In desperation, Heron Allen threw the stone into the Regent's Canal in London. He believed he was rid of it forever. But months later, a dredger pulled the stone from the canal and sold it to a jeweler. The jeweler recognized the unusual gem, traced it back to Heron Allen, and returned it to him, believing he was doing the man a kindness. Heron Allen was horrified. When his daughter was born in 1904, Heron Allen became convinced that the stone's malevolence would endanger her. He packed the amethyst into 7 sealed boxes, each nested inside the next, surrounded by protective charms. He deposited the boxes in a bank vault with strict written instructions that they should not be opened until 3 years after his death. He included a note for whoever eventually opened the final box. It said, "Whoever shall then open it shall first read out this warning, and then do as he pleases with the jewel. My advice to him or her is to cast it into the sea." Heron Allen died in 1943. His daughter, wanting nothing to do with the cursed stone, donated the sealed package to the Natural History Museum in London as quickly as she could. It sat unopened in a drawer until 1972, when a curator named Peter Tandy discovered it and broke the seals. The amethyst, set in a ring of blackened silver adorned with zodiacal symbols and carved scarab beetles, was placed in the museum's collection. Even then, the strange occurrences didn't stop. In the year 2000, a curator named John Whitaker was asked to transport the stone to a symposium. On the drive there, he and his wife were caught in one of the most violent thunderstorms they had ever experienced, with lightning crashing on both sides of the car. His wife screamed at him to throw the stone out the window. On subsequent occasions when Whitaker attempted to attend events related to the stone, he became violently ill. Once, he collapsed in agony and later passed a kidney stone. He admitted it could all be coincidence, but his willingness to say so grew weaker with each incident, and from a gemstone locked away in 7 boxes to a body locked away in ice for more than 5,000 years, our final story takes us to one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century and the chilling string of deaths that followed it. High in the Otzi Alps, along the remote border between Austria and Italy, a pair of German hikers named Helmut and Erika Simon were exploring off the beaten path on September 19, 1991, when they stumbled upon something protruding from the melting ice. At first, they thought they had found the body of a recently deceased mountaineer. What they had actually found was far older and far more extraordinary. It was the naturally mummified remains of a man who had died more than 5,300 years ago during the Copper Age. He would come to be known as Otzi the Iceman, named after the Otzi Alps where he was found, and he would become one of the most studied human specimens in the history of science. Otzi was remarkably well preserved. His clothes, tools, weapons, and even his last meal were intact, offering scientists an unprecedented window into prehistoric European life. Analysis of his body revealed over 60 tattoos, evidence of arthritis and intestinal parasites, and, most dramatically, an arrowhead lodged in his left shoulder. Researchers concluded that Otzi had been murdered, shot from behind by an assailant whose identity has been lost to the millennia. His body then froze in the ice and remained there, undisturbed, until the warming climate slowly exposed him. It was an incredible find. But what happened in the years after his discovery cast a long, dark shadow over the entire project. The first to die was Dr. Rainer Henn, head of the forensic team that examined Otzi's remains. Henn was one of the first people to make direct physical contact with the Iceman, picking up the ancient cadaver with his bare hands and placing it into a body bag. In 1992, Henn was killed in a car crash while driving to a conference where he was scheduled to present his findings about Otzi. He was 64 years old. Next was Kurt Fritz, the experienced mountaineer who had led Henn and the research team to the site where Otzi was found. Fritz had also organized the helicopter transportation of the mummy's remains. In 1993, Fritz was caught in an avalanche and killed. He was the only member of his climbing party to be struck. He was 52. Then came Rainer Holzel, an Austrian journalist who had been granted exclusive access to film the removal of Otzi's body from the ice. His footage formed the basis of an hour-long documentary. A few months after the program aired, Holzel was diagnosed with a brain tumor. He died at the age of 47. The fourth death was perhaps the most haunting. Helmut Simon, the hiker who had originally discovered Otzi with his wife, went missing during a trek in the Alps in October 2004. Due to heavy snow, it took searchers 8 days to find him. His body was discovered face down in a stream at the base of a cliff. He had fallen more than 300 feet to his death. Like Otzi himself, he was found in the mountains, in the cold, alone. Then, within an hour of Helmut Simon's funeral, Dieter Warnecke, the head of the mountain rescue team that had been assigned to find Simon, dropped dead of a heart attack. He was 45 years old. The sixth figure linked to the curse was Conrad Spindler, the lead archaeologist who had spent years studying the Iceman. Spindler was famously dismissive of the curse stories, once telling journalists, "I think it's a load of rubbish. It is all media hype. The next thing you will be saying is that I will be next." Spindler died in 2005 from complications related to multiple sclerosis. He was 66. The seventh was Dr. Tom Loy, a molecular archaeologist from the University of Queensland who had conducted groundbreaking DNA analysis on Otzi's clothing and weapons. Loy discovered traces of blood from at least 4 other people on Otzi's gear, which reshaped our understanding of the Iceman's final hours and suggested he had been involved in a violent confrontation before his death. His analysis indicated that 2 different blood samples were found on a single arrowhead in Otzi's quiver, suggesting the Iceman had killed 2 people with the same arrow and retrieved it both times. A 4th blood type was found on Otzi's coat, possibly from a wounded companion he had carried on his back. It was revolutionary work that transformed Otzi from a lone traveler into a participant in a bloody prehistoric conflict. Loy was on the verge of completing a book about his findings when he was found dead in his Brisbane home at the age of 63. He had been diagnosed with a blood disorder, but the timing of his death and the fact that his condition had first appeared the same year he began studying the Iceman raised eyebrows even among skeptics. Loy himself had never believed in the curse, taking a firmly scientific approach to what he saw as nothing more than statistical noise. But his colleagues couldn't help noticing that the list of the dead kept growing. There were others too. Professor Friedrich Tiefenbrunner, a member of Conrad Spindler's research team at Innsbruck University, died during open-heart surgery. The exact connection between his work and the curse was tenuous, but the media counted him among the victims nonetheless. And the pattern itself, the accumulation of strange and untimely deaths, created a narrative momentum that became almost impossible to stop. Each new death fed the legend, and each dismissal by scientists only made the story more compelling, because the public could see that even the skeptics weren't immune. Of course, hundreds of people have worked on the Otzi project over the decades, and the vast majority of them are alive and well. Statistically, it may be unremarkable that a handful of older individuals involved in a decades-long research project have died. But the specific circumstances of these deaths, the car crash on the way to a lecture, the solitary avalanche death, the hiker found frozen in the mountains just like Otzi himself, and the heart attack within an hour of a funeral, create a pattern that is difficult to dismiss as pure coincidence. Today, Otzi rests in a specially designed refrigerated chamber at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, where he is kept at a constant temperature well below freezing. Around 300,000 visitors come to see him every year, gazing through a small window at the oldest natural human mummy in Europe. Some of them come for the science, some come for the history, and some, whether they admit it or not, come because of the curse, drawn to the same dark magnetism that has surrounded this frozen man ever since the first person to handle his remains died on a highway a year later. Otzi has been studied, scanned, reconstructed, and displayed for over 3 decades now. His face has been digitally recreated to show what he likely looked like in life. An aging man with deep-set brown eyes, weathered skin, and a sparse beard. A recent genome study even revealed that he likely had darker skin than originally thought and carried the gene for baldness. He is, in many ways, more known to us than most people who lived 5,000 years ago could ever hope to be. And yet, the one thing about him that continues to captivate the public imagination more than any scientific finding is the simple, unsettling question of whether disturbing his rest unleashed something that should have stayed buried in the ice. There's something about cursed objects that taps into a fear older than language itself. The idea that the wrong object in the wrong hands can bring suffering and death is one of the most ancient and universal beliefs in human culture. Every civilization, from ancient Egypt to medieval Europe to modern-day America, has stories of objects that carry darkness within them. We wrap them in legend and folklore, but underneath the mythology, there are real people who died, real families that were torn apart, and real questions that have never been satisfactorily answered. Whether these stories are true in a literal, supernatural sense, or whether they are products of coincidence, confirmation bias, and the human need to find patterns in chaos, they endure because they speak to something deep within us. They remind us that the world is stranger and darker than we sometimes want to believe, and that some things, once disturbed, may never rest again. If you enjoyed this journey through the most unsettling haunted objects ever documented, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and it means we get to keep exploring these mysteries together. Until next time, sleep well, and maybe think twice before picking up that antique at the flea market.